I did not flinch. I did not say a word. I just stood there in the break room holding a paper cup of coffee that had already gone cold, reading the email on my phone for the third time, making absolutely sure I understood what I was looking at. Effective immediately, your position as Senior Project Coordinator has been eliminated. HR will contact you regarding the return of your badge and company property. We wish you the best in your future endeavors. It was signed by my boss's daughter. Not my boss, his daughter. A 26-year-old who had been at the company for 8 months and whose primary qualification, as far as any of us could tell, was sharing a last name with the man whose name was on the building. I had been at Viridian Construction for 6 years. 6 years of 70-hour weeks. 6 years of catching mistakes that would have cost the company hundreds of thousands of dollars. 6 years of covering for people above me, below me, and sideways from me, and never once asking for credit I wasn't given. I had built the project management system they were still using. I had negotiated the subcontractor rates that saved the Whitmore development alone nearly $400,000 in material costs. I knew where every single body was buried at that company, metaphorically speaking, and I'd kept every single secret with a professionalism that frankly should have come with a separate line item on my salary. And I was let go by email at 4047 on a Friday afternoon, 3 days before my wedding. I want to be clear about something. When people hear this story, they sometimes assume I must have been devastated, crying in the break room, calling my fiancé in a panic, shaking. I was not any of those things. I think that surprised people more than the firing itself. What I actually felt, standing there in that break room with my cold coffee and my phone, was something closer to clarity. The kind of clarity you get when something you've been half expecting for months finally arrives, and you realize you already made your peace with it a long time ago. I had known for a while that something was coming. I just had not known when. My boss. I'll call him Mr. Voss because he does not deserve the intimacy of a first name from me. Had been at Meridian for 30 years. He had built something real there, and for most of my tenure I had genuinely respected him. He was demanding and occasionally unreasonable, but he was fair in the way that matters. He rewarded results. He saw what you did and he said so. That changed when his daughter arrived. Her name was Felicity, and I want to be careful here, because what I am about to say is not personal. It is simply accurate. Felicity was not qualified for the role she was given. She did not have the background, she did not have the instincts, and she did not have the instincts, and she did not have the patience to develop either. What she had was confidence that I have never seen matched in someone with so little reason for it, and a father who was so afraid of disappointing her that he had apparently decided the rest of us existed to make her look good. I became her primary obstacle approximately 3 weeks after she arrived. Not because I tried to be, because I was good at my job, and when you are good at your job and someone unqualified is placed above you, the gap between what they claim and what is true becomes impossible to hide. Every meeting where I answered a question she couldn't, every report that quietly corrected numbers she had submitted, every subcontractor who called me instead of her because they had learned, fast, who actually knew what was happening on a given project. I did not rub it in. I did not undermine her deliberately. But I existed, and apparently that was enough. The first time she tried to have me removed, I did not find out until afterward. One of the project managers, a man who had worked alongside me for 4 years and whose vacation requests I had approved probably 100 times, told me quietly over lunch that Felicity had gone to her father and said I was creating a hostile environment, that I was resistant to new leadership, that I had been difficult in meetings. What had actually happened in those meetings was that I had disagreed with her about load-bearing structural timelines on the Kellerman project, and I had been correct, and the structural engineer had backed me up in writing. But somehow that became me being difficult. Mr. Voss had not fired me that time. Whether it was because he knew she was wrong or because he did not want the liability, I am not sure. But something shifted. I could feel it. The way he stopped making eye contact in the hallway. The way my name disappeared from certain email threads. The way Felicity started CCing herself on everything I sent, a habit she had never bothered with before. I started keeping records, not because I was planning anything, just because I had worked in construction long enough to know that paper trails are the only thing standing between you and someone else's version of events. I saved emails. I documented decisions. I noted dates and times and who had been in which room when which thing was said. I also quietly updated my resume. I did not tell anyone at work. I did not tell my fiancé immediately because we were in the final weeks before the wedding and I did not want to add one more thing to a pile that was already considerable. I kept going to work. I kept going to work. I kept doing my job. I kept doing it well because that is who I am, and because I have never once in my life given someone the satisfaction of watching me phone it in. The wedding was on a Saturday in October. We had been planning it for 14 months, my fiancé and I, with occasional enthusiastic interference from my mother, who had opinions about centerpieces that I will not go into here. It was not an enormous wedding. 82 people at a venue outside the city, a restored farmhouse with string lights and a catering team I had vetted with the same energy I brought to subcontractor negotiations, because that is how my brain works, and I have made peace with it. I had taken the Friday before as a personal day. I had given myself that one day to just exist outside of work, to get my nails done and pick up the dress alterations and have dinner with my mother and my closest friend without checking my phone every 20 minutes. The email arrived at 4:37 that afternoon, when I was sitting in the parking lot of the alterations place with my dress in a bag across my back seat, about to call my friend to figure out dinner. I read it 3 times, and then I called my fiancé. He picked up on the second ring, the way he always does, and I said, "You are not going to believe this email." He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Read it to me." So I did, word for word. He was quiet again, longer this time. And then he said, "Okay, do you need me to come get you?" "I'm fine," I said. I wanted you to know." "Okay," he said, and there was something in his voice I couldn't quite name. Not surprise exactly. Something more like the sound a person makes when they have been waiting for a thing to happen, and it finally has. "We'll talk tonight. Are you still going to dinner?" I was. Because I had made a reservation, and I was not going to let Felicity Voss ruin my Friday night on top of everything else. Dinner was good. My friend, who has known me since we were 19, watched me tell the story and did not offer a single piece of unsolicited advice, which is one of the things I love most about her. She just listened. And at the end, she said, "What are you going to do?" "Get married tomorrow," I said, "and figure the rest out after." She raised her glass. We clinked. I did not cry. The wedding was, and I mean this without any of the obligatory bride language, genuinely one of the best days of my life. Not because everything was perfect. The florist sent the wrong shade of white roses and the string lights in the east section went out for about 40 minutes, and one of my cousins gave a toast that went 8 minutes longer than it was supposed to. But none of that mattered, because the people I loved were in one room, and I was marrying someone who had said when I told him I'd been fired 3 days before our wedding, "We'll talk tonight," instead of making it a crisis. That, I would later understand, was information. The reception was winding down. We were in that golden hour when the older guests have started leaving, and the remaining people are dancing in that loose, unself-conscious way that only happens when the formal part of the evening is definitively over, when my phone buzzed in my small bag. It was a number I did not recognize. I almost ignored it. I almost let it go to voicemail and checked it in the morning, but something made me step to the edge of the room and pick up. "Is this the former senior project coordinator at Beridian Construction?" The voice was professional, measured. "It is," I said. "I'm calling from the firm of Callahan and Reyes. We represent a number of commercial real estate development interests, and we've been monitoring Meridian's project portfolio for some time." A pause. "We understand there may have been a recent change in your employment situation." I looked across the room at my husband, who was talking to his college roommate and laughing at something. As if he could feel me looking, he glanced over. He smiled. "There has," I said. "We'd like to set up a conversation at your earliest convenience." I said I was available the following week. I hung up and stood there for a moment, processing. It would take me another 6 days to learn how that call had happened. It was not a coincidence. My husband, who I had known as a general contractor who had built a quiet, solid small business doing residential renovations, had, it turned out, a rather different professional footprint than I had understood. His business was not small, his network was not limited, and he had made, without telling me and without asking my permission, one single phone call on my behalf the morning after I told him about the email. He had called in a favor from someone who owed him several. When I found out, I was not entirely sure how I felt about it. We had a very long conversation. I want to be honest about that because I think the version of this story, where everything is triumphant and clean, is not entirely true to what it was actually like. I had built my career on being the person who did not need anyone to open doors for her. And someone had opened a door. And the fact that it was someone who loved me and did it without expecting anything and did it because he was angry on my behalf did not make the complexity disappear. But I also thought about the 6 years, and the email, and the 4,047 on a Friday, 3 days before my wedding, and I decided that I was allowed to walk through the door and figure out the rest from the other side. What happened at Meridian in the months after I left is something I only know from the outside. I was not there. I did not go looking for information, but in a medium-sized industry things travel, and what traveled back to me through enough degrees of separation that I could not have manufactured it if I tried, was this. The Kellerman project, the one where I had the disagreement with Felicity about structural timelines, ran into exactly the problems I had flagged. Not catastrophic, no one was hurt, but significant delays and a penalty clause that cost Meridian close to $300,000 in liquidated damages. The structural engineer's written documentation, the one that had backed my position, became part of a conversation with the client that Mr. Kellerman, boss, apparently found very uncomfortable. Felicity left the company. I do not know the details and I did not ask for them. Mr. Voss called me. Once. About 5 months after the email. It was a number I recognized, and I let it ring, and when the voicemail came through, I listened to it standing in the new office I had been working out of for 4 months, which had a view of a different part of the same city, and a salary that was, I will just say this plainly, considerably more than what Meridian had been paying me. He said he wanted to have a conversation, that he thought there had been some mistakes made, that he had always valued my contributions and he hoped we might be able to discuss what a return might look like. I did not return the call. Not out of spite. Or not only out of spite, if I'm being honest, but because the version of me who had spent 6 years making herself indispensable to a company that could let her go at 4:47 on a Friday via email was not a version I was interested in returning to. I had, without entirely planning to, stepped into something different, something that reflected more accurately what I had actually built. My friend asked me, about a year later, if I was angry. I thought about it seriously before I answered. I was, I said, for a while, but it's hard to stay angry at something that turned out to be the best thing that happened to you. She thought about that. Would you have left on your own? Probably not, I admitted. Not soon enough. There is something about a job you are good at that keeps you there even when the conditions around you have stopped being worthy of you. The competence itself becomes a kind of trap. You think, I can fix this. I can outlast this. I am too valuable here to leave. And maybe you are. But valuable to whom and at what cost are questions worth asking before 6 years have gone by. I am asking them now from a position where I get to decide the answer. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, everything. My husband and I had dinner last month at the farmhouse venue where we got married. They do a fall dinner series on Friday evenings and we had gone on a whim, the way you can when you are no longer working until 8 p.m. to make someone else's daughter look like she knows what she's doing. We sat at a table by the window and ate something with squash in it that I cannot now remember the name of, and the string lights were working in all sections, and at some point my husband reached across the table and said, "You know what I was thinking about today?" What? That email. I smiled. Why? Because, he said, I keep thinking about whoever sent it. Whether they know. Know what? He tilted his head. That they did you a favor. I looked at him for a moment, this man who had made one phone call and then waited quietly for me to find my own footing, who had understood, without being told, that the most useful thing he could do was stay out of the way after the door was open. I think I said, that is the very last thing they would ever want to know. He laughed, the string lights held, and I finished my dinner without checking my phone once. There is a version of this story where I am the victim, where the point is what they did to me and how wrong it was, and how satisfying it felt to watch it unravel for them. I understand why people want that version. It is clean. It has a clear villain and a clear winner, and everything lands where it is supposed to. But that is not actually what I take from any of this. What I think about now, when I am being honest with myself, which I try to be, is the 6 years. Not what happened at the end of them, but what I was doing inside them. I was good, I worked hard. I kept my head down and I told myself that was enough, that results speak for themselves, that integrity is its own reward. And I believed that. I still believe parts of it. But I had also confused being indispensable with being safe. Those are not the same thing, and confusing them cost me years I cannot get back. Felicity did not take anything from me that I had not already, in some quiet way, given away. I had given my energy and my judgment and my better hours to a place that would weigh them only as long as they were convenient. That is not entirely her fault. That is something I had been allowing for a long time before she ever arrived. Here's what I think character actually is, stripped of anything that sounds like a motivational poster. It is what you do with information you would rather not have. Felicity had information she was not the most qualified person in the room, and she spent her energy hiding it and managing around it. I had information that I was not being valued proportionally, and I spent my energy working harder, as if effort alone could change the terms of an arrangement that the other party had already decided. Neither of us handled what we knew with particular wisdom. The difference is that her approach had a ceiling and mine, eventually, had a door. The call that came during the reception was not luck. Or it was luck in the same way that anything is luck. It found me because of choices I had made and documented and maintained over 6 years. The paper trail I kept. The relationships I had built honestly with people who remembered. The fact that when I disagreed with someone in a meeting, I had the structural engineer's report to back me up. None of that is glamorous. It is just the slow, unglamorous work of being someone whose word means something, over and over, until the record speaks without you having to. And the steadiness I felt reading that email, the thing that people keep asking me about, the fact that I did not fall apart, that was not toughness in the way people romanticize toughness. It was just the result of having already decided a long time before that Friday afternoon who I was and what I would and would not do. That kind of decision, made quietly and kept consistently, is the only armor that actually holds. You do not need anyone to see it, you just need it to be true. Mr. Voss left a voicemail. I did not call him back, not because I wanted him to suffer, but because I finally understood that returning to a place that had decided I was dispensable would not prove that I wasn't. It would only prove that I had not yet learned what the email was trying to teach me. I learned it.